It would be mine that tears through here like a Tasmanian devil, but
Robby, I just told Steve, I said, you heard that he went on his way rejoicing.
yeah, absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning.
We're so glad that you are all out here with us. We welcome those who are joining us by way of Facebook, and we invite you to listen. We invite you to get a hold of us if you have any questions about what you hear today. If you watch this later on YouTube or some other platform, we thank you for joining us. We are going to continue today in Matthew chapter 10. We're going to pick up right before we left off, right around, I guess we got to around verse 18 or 19, but we're going to go ahead and pick back up here at the new thought that began in verse number 16, as Jesus is commissioning and teaching his 12 on the mission that he is setting before them. Behold, he said, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. And you know, that was a very comforting statement from the Lord to those men, that they were going to be as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Serpents are attacked by all kinds of people. Everybody wants to kill the snake. And serpents have to be very wise and capable of fleeing and making their escape. And this thought is going to be picked up a little later on in about verse 26. He says here, be harmless as doves. And what a needed statement indeed, that so many people have come along and propose to do good for the Lord and then end up doing irreparable harm. And that is done by a myriad of things, either selfish ambition, you name it. Sin can do a lot of harm, and a lot of men have done much evil to the cause of Christ because they were not wise and they were not harmless. Verse 17, but beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils. They will scourge you in their synagogues. The councils, these were the courts of the day. You had the Sanhedrin. You had these councils, these groups of men that made decisions. It was the Jewish rule of law, which was held in check by the Roman authorities. The Romans let the Jews handle their business pretty much unless it was a capital case. Any capital punishment, the death penalty, that was always done by the Romans. They did not allow the Jews to execute. That was only something. But the synagogues was not only a place of worship, but it was a place of where justice was administered. And there were several times that we see these apostles going in and preaching and being beaten in the synagogue. Paul, how many times? 5 times was he beaten in a synagogue. He was beaten by the Jews. He 5 times received 40 stripes save one. That was not Roman law. The Romans did not have a count to meet. And so Paul would have been beaten by his own countrymen. And you shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. And it is indeed remarkable that governors and kings would take such note and such interest in these gospel preachers that they would bring them to trial, that they would arrest them. These despised and illiterate men, these rough-necked fishermen, if you will, would grab the attention and arrest the attention of the most powerful men on earth. And he says, you're going to do that for my sake, for a testimony against them, those that are not worthy, those that will not receive the message that they have been prepared for. Remember, this is the message to the Jews. This is the limited commission. And these people were prepared for this message. And when they do not receive it, that's a testimony against them. But also, he says, and the Gentiles. Well, this is the limited commission. I think the mention of the Gentiles here is the wider mission of the post-resurrection commission is in view here. I think he's saying that this is the foundation, and what you do now even will build on to the post-resurrection mission to go into all the world when the Gentiles do receive the gospel. Verse 9, do you have a comment?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I want to go back to scourge again. It's not just beating, but it's actually being whipped with
Yes.
lashings. I mean, it's vicious, unmerciful
Yes.
beatings.
Yeah, so
That's what they're facing.
Yeah, so the Jews had a very strict count. They could not go. It was the law. You could not go above 40 stripes. And so to make sure that they did not cross that threshold, they did 39 stripes. And they, at some time, developed going from a rod to a rod with 3 strands attached to it. So each lash was 3 lashes. And so they would do 13, and that's 39 lashes. And they would also, in those braids, tie bone, metal, glass, things of that nature. In John 19:1, when Pilate gave the command for Jesus to be scourged, that word literally means that the flesh hangs in ribbons or shreds. And it was brutal indeed. I think that's a light statement. Verse 19, but when they deliver you up, take no thought how or what you shall speak. For it shall be given you in that same hour what you shall speak. He says not if you are delivered up, but when. When you are. This is something that is going to happen. I'm sending you out here as sheep in the midst of wolves. And what do wolves do to sheep? They tear them up. It's lamb chops. A wolf is not afraid of a sheep. A sheep has no defense mechanism. It has no offensive mechanism. It is dinner when a prey animal comes into the scene. He says, when they deliver you up, you take no thought. How or what? So you don't take any thought for the manner in which you are going to speak, and you don't take no thought for the message that you're going to speak. Why? Because God is with you. It will be given you in that same hour what you shall speak. Verse 20, for it is not you that speaks, but the Spirit of your Father which speaketh in you. It wasn't the humiliation of being arrested and beaten. It wasn't the cruel pain and the agony that they would go through, that they were afraid of. It was their own unskillful ability to articulate what they were supposed to say. That's what they were afraid of. And this message that Jesus gives them gave them confidence. You mean as soon as I need to give an answer, as soon as I am called to the carpet to give an apology for my faith, I'm going to be given what I am to speak. That gives confidence. If that were something today, there wouldn't be anybody that was ever afraid of public speaking. But that is not the case. And so sometimes I stand up here and look like an idiot. But nevertheless, these guys were inspired. It is not you that speaks, but the Spirit of your Father which speaketh in you. And now we turn our attention to the divisive nature of the message that's going to be delivered. And the brother shall deliver up the brother to death. He says, and the father, the child. And the children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. The gospel will divide families. And if you know anything about family quarrels, they're sometimes the most bitter, the most intense and hateful. And Jesus says here, when you take the gospel message, these Jews that reject it are going to even kill their own family members over it.
It was Don Blackwell that pointed it out, and I was skeptical at first, but I've studied it. And when Jesus' own half-brothers said, why don't you go to Jerusalem with this message? They're trying to get him killed.
Yeah.
He said, even his own brother, he was talking about what a change in James, the brother
Yes.
of Christ, that he repented so completely that he was a pillar in the church and an
Yes.
elder and all that. But his first to say, why don't you go down to Jerusalem and say some of this stuff?
Yeah, that would have been a suicide mission.
Yeah.
Basically is what he was sending him on. And so in verse 22, it says, and you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. There's a bitter divide between the people of Israel, the Jews, and the message that the disciples, the apostles, are going to fan out and take to them. And he says that you're going to be hated of all men. Well, we know that's not literal, because there would be some worthy that would invite them into their house, that would offer them provender, that would offer them a place to stay, to be able to get the message out.
Couldn't he say it the same way by saying, you're going to start feeling like Elijah?
Yeah.
See, that's what he said, all men.
And the literal, it's you're going to be hated by all types. There's going to be all kinds of people that hate you.
In my Bible, King James Version here, men is italicized.
Right.
That means it's added and wasn't in the
Right.
original scripture. So just all.
Yeah.
Hated by
But
all.
it's literally, it's all types. You're going to be hated by the governors, and you're going to be hated by the peasants. You're going to be hated. There's going to be all types of people, all kinds of people that hate you for this message. Go ahead.
And, you know, if you look at the root of that, the reasoning behind that, all these people that hated the apostles and stuff, what they were teaching was a threat to their authority.
Yeah.
Whether it be a governor or a Roman governor or a priest or somebody in the Jewish religion, you know, the position of power or prominence that they had, the gospel was taking that away essentially
Right.
and giving it to Christ. And,
Yes.
and so that was a threat to their way of life.
Yes. You had in that Roman government, you had the top dog, Caesar. And he had delegated to rule over different areas, Herod. You had Herod that delegated to one, Pontius Pilate, who would answer in that line of succession. And Pilate could not allow someone who claimed to be king live in his area, because what would Caesar do to him? You're allowing a guy who claims to be king live under your watch? Well, Herod, off with your head. Caesar was the ultimate authority. He had control of the entire known world at the time. The gospel message was that old story of God establishing a kingdom and a king whose reign would last forever and it would never be destroyed. And you think that the people in power wouldn't have an issue with that? They didn't understand the nature of the kingdom. They didn't understand that the king of that kingdom would actually offer himself to be murdered brutally. But nevertheless, their understanding was there was a kingdom coming. They understood that. It was spoken of by prophets. They knew that the scripture said that it would last forever. It would break into pieces all the other nations. All nations would flow unto it. Sounds like a pretty powerful thing, right? They were going to take up issue with that. And it was something that was going to bring in the Gentiles. And do you think the Jews had a problem with that? Yeah, they hated anybody that wasn't a Jew. And so he says, you'll be hated of all types of men for my name's sake. But he that endureth unto the end shall be saved. And from the very beginning, we have this idea of endurance and patience under fire that Christians would have to exude and have to show in their lives. You remember the Hebrews writer in Hebrews 11 and verse 1 said something to the effect of running with patience or endurance the race that is set before us. That's the Christian charter. That's what we have to be about, is endurance and patience. But when they persecute you, verse 23, he says this, when they persecute you in this city, flee you into another. For verily I say unto you, you shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. Now there's a lot of speculation on what this verse means and what it is leading to, and we'll talk about a little bit of that. But before that, he says, when they persecute you in this city, what are you to do? I am to court, and I am to desire, and I am to put myself up as a martyr. I am to court martyrdom, right? No, Jesus said, flee. Get out of there. Martyrdom is something that happens when you are brought under the kind of persecution that says you recount your faith in Christ and you're chained up, you have nowhere to go, you've been captured, and if you will recount your faith in Christ and you will pronounce your belief in the Roman deities and you'll offer some incense or something, then we'll save your life. That, of course, was the moment in time where a person's faith was tested to the nth degree. But we were not, the Christians were not supposed to seek after that type of thing. Christ wanted them out in the field, out in the vineyard. Lift your eyes up. The fields are ripe for harvest. The laborers, the harvest is plentiful. The laborers are few. He needed the laborers. And so they were not to court martyrdom. They were to flee to another city to find more people that they could preach the gospel to. And then he says, you shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. And some say, well, that's his second coming. But that can't be the second coming, because at the second coming it's all over. Some want to say that this was his coming in AD 70. But I have to reject that notion on this principle, that in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 6, in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 23, Paul writes there that in his day that the gospel had been preached to every creature under heaven, that the gospel message had gone into the whole world. And Colossians was written about AD 62. Some 8-9 years before the fall of Jerusalem. And so it can't be that, because he says you will not have gone over Israel before the Son of Man be come. It can't be AD 70, because by AD 62 the gospel had gone into the entire world.
Can it be related to Revelation 3, where, behold, I come quickly, I come and take your candlestick?
I'm going to say that this is him coming in his kingdom. Acts 2. They had not yet gone throughout the entirety of Israel. They hadn't even left Jerusalem yet, much less Judea and Samaria, which happened in Acts chapter 8. And then it was not until Acts chapter 10 that it went to the Gentiles, or the uttermost parts of the world. But the gospel went just as Jesus had said. In Luke 24, he said, thus it behooved the Christ, I think it's around 44 or 45, thus it behooved the Christ to suffer, to die, to rise the third day, and that repentance and remission of sins would be preached among all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem was the beginning point, but then it would go to Judea, it would go to Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. And when you follow the book of Acts, that's exactly how it happened. He says, you flee to another city. You will not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. You remember, he's talking about the imminence of the kingdom, so close you could touch it, right? He says, it is at hand. You're not even going to blanket the nation of Israel with the gospel before the kingdom is established.
And he chooses his Son of Man description, not Son of God.
Yes. He preferred that title, Son of Man, and he'll use it very, very often. In verse 24, the disciple is not above his master, nor the servant above his Lord. And that very statement is the very thing that the devil wants to invert. The devil wants us to have an idea about ourselves that we're greater, that our thoughts and our desires and our ambitions are greater than anyone else or anything else, even of the Lord himself. What did the devil practice sometime past when he rebelled against God? He thought, I'm going to be greater. It's hellish and devilish. But Jesus said it right. The disciple is not above his master, his teacher, neither the servant above his Lord. It is enough for the disciple that he be as his master, and the servant as his Lord. If they have called the master of the house, that is the head of the house, Beelzebub, how much more shall they call them of his household? That is, if they have called the master of the house, which Jesus calls himself, he is the head of the house. He is the master of the house. If they have called me that, what do you think they're going to call you? He's going to get into this idea about how men hate the name of Christ. And they do. They still do. But they can't attack Christ. They can attack you. And in doing so, Christ says, well, they're attacking me. But people hate Christ, and so they're going to attack his messengers. But then he gives them this admonition in verse 26. Fear them not, therefore. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. What I tell you in darkness, that speak ye in light. And what you hear in the ear, that preach ye upon the housetops. This was a phrase that just said, whatever you hear me tell you to say, you proclaim it openly. Everything. This is a very small and secretive thing that's about to spread out. We're going to blow this open. And you don't need to fear. God is going to be working in and through you. And you just need to be open and bold with the message given you. And this is the limitation of the enemy. In verse 28, and fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. There is a limit to the power of the enemy. There is a limit to what he can do, what he can get done. He can affect your physical status, but he cannot touch the spiritual. He says you don't need to fear them which kill the body, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. And then he's going to give them reasons to not fear. In verse 29 and 30, are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, for a penny? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. That is, without his knowledge, without him knowing. He says, but the very hairs of your head are numbered. Fear ye not, therefore, ye are of more value than many sparrows. And sparrows were so common. They were just multitudes of them. And they were sold very cheaply in the market. You could get them for a penny. You can get 2 of them. Cheap. But he says, your God knows you very intimately. Your God knows the number of hairs on your head. And one of those cheap, one of those mundane little birds will not fall dead apart from the knowledge of God. How much more do you think he's in tune with you? There is nothing in this universe. There is not a leaf that falls on the tree that God does not take notice of. That is how in tune God is with his creation. That a little old bird catches the sight of God as it falls down lifeless. How much more in tune do you think your Father is with you, having the very hairs of your head numbered? You're of much more value than many sparrows. How valuable? Well, Jesus said you're worth dying for. God sent his Son to die for you. You want to talk about value. You want to talk about having worth. You want to talk about intrinsic value to the God of heaven. You were worth dying for. Go ahead.
What did they do with them sparrows? Eat them?
I don't know what they did with them. I mean, it was probably, it was back in this day, people lived on 1 or 2 ounces of meat a week. We don't have a clue of what life was like when Jesus talked about those hungering and thirsting after righteousness. He had people in mind that would fight you over a rotten banana peel in a dumpster just to have something to chew on. We don't have a clue about the hunger that was in the mind of the Savior when he said, you've got to hunger and thirst after righteousness. You do that, you'll be filled. He says that we're of much more value. Verse 32, whosoever therefore shall confess me before men, him will I confess also before my Father which is in heaven. Do not fear. This is in that same line of do not fear. Go about your mission. You are worth it to God. You are valuable to God. You make the confession. Jesus made the good confession. You know that? You realize that? In 1 Timothy chapter 6, I believe it's verse 16, where Paul wrote to Timothy, he said, in Jesus Christ, who made that good confession before Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate asked him, are you a king? Jesus said, thou hast spoken.
Good confession.
Yeah. Jesus made the good confession. Later on in this book, Matthew chapter 16 and verse 16, Peter makes the good confession. But who do you say that I, the Son of Man, am? Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And if we're going to be saved, we are going to have to make the good confession. And it's even in times, and this is a confessing in Him. And it's something that we do our entire Christian life. You can confess Him and be baptized and you can come up out of the water, added to the church, placed into, baptized into his body. But what happens 6 months when you deny him?
He'll deny you also before God.
He says, whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven.
Before we start verse 34, I'd like to make a football analogy. We're always talking about the defensive game, the offensive game, and what I wanted to suggest, and then also want to refer to Matthew 14 for an example here, but when he says brother shall deliver up brother, verse 21, that is an offensive act where the brother delivers up a brother unto death. In the same chapter, verse 34, it's a defense thing. This is going to happen, or maybe I've got it backwards. What I'm trying to say, when the brother delivers you up, you're on defense. But verse 34, you're the one that's causing this division. Verse 34, and the example, just a few chapters over in Matthew 14, it said that the reason John the Baptist was thrown in prison is he told Herod, it's not lawful for you to have this woman for your wife. And the example to me, just in the same chapter when his head was cut off, Jesus had an excellent opportunity to teach us and say, John, you should have picked your battles. Why in the world did you say that to Herod? He didn't do that. John did cause his own death, but that's what I say. He was on the offense. He was saying, this is not lawful.
Yeah.
And that's what I say starts happening in verse 34.
And Herodias had no doubt left and divorced Philip. But he said, even with her married to Herod, God, through John, said, you unlawfully have your brother Philip's wife. She was still married to Philip in the eyes of God. Go ahead.
Back then, a Christian could have easily avoided prosecution if they would have just denied Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't. He's just saying, you're not worthy if you're not willing.
Absolutely. The word deny in verse 33, he says, but whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny. That word means to disown or to repudiate. And so Jesus says, you deny me in these situations, you're disowning me. And when you disown me, I'll disown you. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 12, he says, if you suffer, you shall also reign with me. But if you deny me, I'll deny you. He will deny you. And so it's important that we hold fast to our profession of faith, as the Hebrews writer said. Verse 34, think not that I am come to send peace on the earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. And that is a metaphor for conflict. That is a metaphor for an intense division. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. Jesus says here, wow, and it's interesting because Isaiah calls him the Prince of Peace. In Luke 179, he's to guide our feet in the way of peace. It's called the gospel of peace. But here, Jesus said, I've not come to bring peace, but conflict, to set at variance. It's because of how men react to the truth. And Jesus said this, if you love anybody more than me, you're not worthy of me. You're not choosing against your mother or your father. You're choosing against the God of heaven. And I know we love our parents. I know we love our grandparents. I know we love our children. But we've got to answer to God according to the truth. And God sent Jesus to die and establish it. And He doesn't take it lightly. We have got to make a decision for Jesus regardless of what our family thinks about it. And Jesus in verse 38 calls this your cross. If you're not willing to choose Jesus over any family member, if you're not willing to choose Jesus over anything, you're not taking up the cross.
Just gonna use a
And you're not following Him.
First example, some of you know that this past week I had a kidney stone, and I've heard some people say, well, kidney stones are just my cross to bear. No, crosses are something you take up intentionally, not something that happens to you.
Yep,
Something you
absolutely.
intentionally take up.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
in the cross, as we remember every week and more, was not easy. It was like the worst form of death. And when you have issues within your family, to us that is a cross.
Sure.
That you intentionally take that stand. That's taking up your cross. You know.
There's no true peace unless you find it with God.
That's right. You think the family conflict is tough? You think mama's going to be mad at you when you leave the denominational doctrine of whatever denomination they've always belonged to? You think that's conflict? Stand before God on the day of judgment, having rejected the truth and having all the opportunity in the world, and you think you've got conflict in your family? Think about the conflict with God.
Ain't seen nothing yet.
And then there's the family that you didn't stand up with earlier, right there with you,
Yeah,
going the wrong way.
yeah. It reminds me of pick your battles, right? Are you going to battle with your family? Are you going to be an example to them? To show them that I've actually learned the truth and I'm willing to submit to it no matter what, because I'm not going to stand before the God of heaven, before the wrath of the God of heaven, and be found lacking. I want to be on His good side. Verse 39, he that findeth his life shall lose it. He that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. It's worth it. You give up your earthly comfort. You give up the happiness of your mama and your daddy, of whatever, because you reject the religion of your youth, your familial ties. And Jesus says that's called finding your life. But if you don't choose Jesus, not only do you lose your family in eternity, you lose Him too. And so he says, verse 40, he that receiveth you receiveth me, and he that receiveth me receiveth him that sent me. This is going back to earlier in the chapter, verses 9 through 15, when he talks about you don't provide gold or silver, you don't take your cloaks and your staves, you just go. And whoever receives you, you put your peace upon that house, and that person is worthy. And so that's what he's going back to here. But just to go back, because we're out of time, I want to end on this note. And we'll pick up in verse 40 next week. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loses his life for my sake shall find it. In Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, John recorded there the words of Jesus, that some of you will be cast in prison and tried for 10 days. This is a period of time that you're going to be put into duress and heavy persecution. But be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life. Be thou faithful in the face of death. In Revelation chapter 8 and verse 18, which is the backdrop of Revelation 2:10. In Romans 8:18, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present world, and that's suffering with your family, that's whatever it is, in Romans 8:18, it was the suffering of the Roman persecution upon the Christians. I reckon that the sufferings of this present world aren't worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. Y'all hide that in your hearts and let it motivate you to greater faithfulness in this coming week. We'll pick up and finish the chapter next week and get into chapter 11. Thank you so much.